was Christmas Eve, and the hospital was quiet. Green and gold garlands hung on the walls, and sparkling lights made the place feel festive. CLA, who was 62 years old, worked the night shift. She was tired. She looked at the clock. It was 11:45 p.m. She thought about how many more Christmases she might spend alone, far from the family she never had. Suddenly, the doors to the emergency room opened. CLA turned, expecting to see someone who had gotten hurt or drunk at a holiday party. But instead, she saw a little girl, no older than 10. The girl was holding two tiny babies wrapped in thin blankets. The girl's face was pale, and she looked scared. Tears were in her eyes. "Please help them," the girl cried, her voice desperate. CLA rushed to the girl. "What happened? Who are you?" she asked. The girl shook her head and held the babies tighter. I can't say. Just help them, please." Dr. Marcus, the doctor on duty, came over. "We need to check on the babies," he said. "No," the girl screamed, backing away. "I won't leave them. I promise to take care of them." CLA knelt down and looked the girl in the eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked gently. The girl hesitated. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie," CLA said softly. "My name is CLA. I know you're scared, but we need to check on the babies. They're very quiet, and that worries us. Can I take a quick look at them?" Sophie hesitated, but then let go of the blankets just a little. CLA carefully pulled them back and saw two tiny babies, pale and not moving. "Dr. Marcus, we need to get them to the pediatric emergency room now," CLA called out, feeling scared. The babies were quickly taken from Sophie's arms. Sophie screamed and tried to stop them. CLA held her tight. "It's okay," she whispered. "We need to help them." Sophie looked at CLA with wide, scared eyes. "They're my brothers," she said, gasping, realizing she had spoken out loud. CLA froze. "Your brothers?" she asked softly. Sophie nodded, tears falling from her face. "I promised my mom I would take care of them." CLA felt something inside her that she couldn't explain. She understood how Sophie felt. "I won't let anyone take you away," CLA promised. "We'll help you and your brothers." The next few hours were busy with doctors and nurses working hard to help the babies. CLA stayed with Sophie, holding her hand. She didn't want Sophie to feel alone. As Christmas morning approached, CLA stayed by Sophie's side. Sophie was too scared to talk to the police officers who came to ask questions, so CLA told them to give her more time. CLA told Sophie funny stories and sang lullabies, hoping it would help Sophie feel better. But Sophie didn't say much. CLA remembered a time when she was 16. She had given up her baby for adoption because she thought it was the best thing for the child. CLA's eyes filled with tears. Sophie noticed and asked, "Was it something sad?" CLA smiled and wiped her tears. "Yes and no. Sometimes the saddest things teach us the most." Sophie seemed to think about it. "My mom used to say something like that." CLA's heart raced. "What else did your mom say?" Sophie looked at her, tears filling her eyes. She was wise. "I miss her so much." CLA hugged Sophie tightly. "You've been so brave," she whispered. "I know your mom would be very proud of you." Sophie started crying again. She told CLA how her mom had died after giving birth to the twins. Sophie had tried her best to take care of them, but it was hard. Her dad had left her alone with the babies. Sophie had used the money her mom saved for emergencies and brought the babies to the hospital because they weren't doing well. After Sophie shared her story, CLA promised, "I won't let anyone separate you and your brothers. You've been so brave, Sophie. I'll take care of you." The next morning, everyone in the hospital was talking about Sophie and her bravery. CLA made sure Sophie and her brothers would stay together. The hospital staff worked hard to help. Sophie stayed with her brothers in the neonatal unit, watching over them. CLA stayed close by, telling Sophie, "They will love you more than anything. You're the best sister they could have." Dr. Marcus came in with two teddy bears for the babies. "I thought these little warriors might like some company," he said with a smile. Sophie took the bears and placed one next to each baby's incubator. Over the day, more people came to help. A nurse brought baby clothes, a group of volunteers brought diapers and formula, and a family donated a double stroller. CLA smiled as she saw Sophie's worried face slowly start to change to a look of hope. Later, CLA and Sophie were sitting together when CLA said, All these people want to help. You're not alone anymore." Sophie looked around, amazed. "I didn't know there were so many good people in the world," she said softly. As the day went on, Sophie began to talk more. She told CLA about the hard week she spent taking care of the twins. "I tried giving them a bottle every 3 hours like Mom taught me," she explained. "But sometimes they cried so much, I didn't know what to do." CLA listened carefully, her heart breaking with each word. Sophie told CLA how she used towels as diapers when the real ones ran out. She sang lullabies every night when the babies wouldn't stop crying. She even prayed for her father to come back and help. "You did an amazing job, Sophie," CLA said kindly. Many adults would have been scared and not known what to do. Sophie smiled a little, the first time CLA had seen her smile since she arrived. "I just wanted to make Mom proud," Sophie said. CLA's voice became soft with emotion. "I'm sure she is." As they talked, CLA felt a special bond growing between them. Sophie was strong but also sad. CLA felt like she knew exactly what Sophie was going through. CLA started sharing her own stories about her youth, her years as a nurse, and the patients she had cared for. Sophie listened with wide eyes, curious and interested. Just then, a social worker and an old friend of CLA, walked in. Anne's usual serious face was soft and kind. "CLA," and said, nodding at her, "You must be Sophie, the brave girl everyone is talking about." Sophie blushed and hid behind CLA, and knelt down so she could look Sophie in the eyes. "Don't worry," she said gently. "I'm here to help. My job is to make sure you and your brothers are safe." Sophie looked at CLA, unsure. CLA smiled and said, "It's okay. Anne is my friend. We can trust her." Sophie slowly stepped out from behind CLA and looked at Anne, her face full of both hope and worry. "If you're okay with it," Anne said softly, "I'd like to ask you some questions about your family, so we can understand your situation better." Sophie looked at CLA for reassurance. CLA nodded, and Sophie started to speak, and listened carefully, making notes, but mostly offering smiles and kind words. When Sophie finished, and took a deep breath, "Thank you for sharing, Sophie," she said. "You're so brave." She turned to CLA in a low voice. "We need to talk about what comes next. The situation is complicated." CLA nodded. She felt nervous about what would happen next. There were legal questions, and they didn't know where Sophie's father was. But looking at Sophie, who was humming to her sleeping brothers, CLA knew she would do everything she could to help. That night, Christmas was ending. Outside, the city lights sparkled like little stars. Inside the hospital, surrounded by kindness and gifts, a new family was beginning to form. Not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love. CLA looked at Anne, at Sophie, and at the twins. "We'll figure this out," she said firmly. "Together." The next day, Christmas morning, the sky was gray and cold. CLA had hardly slept. She was checking on the babies when she heard shouting in the hallway. Her heart jumped when she recognized Anne's voice mixed with an angry, unfamiliar one. "Where are my children? I have the right to see them." CLA ran out into the hallway and saw a man looking upset. He was waving his arms and was trying to calm him down. 2 hospital security guards stood ready. "Mr. Thomas," and said calmly, "I understand you're upset, but we need to talk about the situation before you can see your children." So froze when she saw Sophie standing at the door, scared, staring at her father. CLA gently called her name. "Sophie, it's okay. You're safe." CLA walked into the room and said, "My name is CLA. I've been taking care of your children since they came here." Thomas quickly stood up. "My children? How are they?" he asked. CLA looked at him seriously. "The babies are fine, thanks to your 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, who took care of them alone for a whole week." Thomas's face looked guilty. "I didn't know. I thought someone from Sarah's family would help," he said. CLA's voice was firm. "No one but Sophie, who had to take care of her mom's death and look after the babies by herself." Thomas felt terrible. I failed Sarah. I failed my children," he cried. "I don't know how to fix this." CLA's anger started to fade. She felt sorry for him. She sat next to him, but kept some space. "The first step is admitting your mistakes," she said kindly. "The next step is doing what's best for your children, even if that means taking a step back." Thomas looked at her with pain in his eyes. I want to do the right thing, he said. I want to ask Sophie for forgiveness. I want to show her that I can change. CLA nodded. It will take time and a lot of effort. Meanwhile, in Sophie's room, and was asking Sophie how she felt. Sophie spoke quietly, her voice now calm. I want to stay with my brothers, she said, and I want CLA to stay with us. And smiled gently. We'll work on that, she said. One step at a time. Outside the room, CLA helped Thomas to his feet. I'll talk to Sophie, she said. If she agrees, you can see her. But on our terms. Thomas nodded and wiped his tears. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for taking care of them when I couldn't. As CLA walked back to Sophie's room, memories of her own past filled her thoughts. Fear, separation, and hope for a better future. She had seen a lot of pain, but also a lot of courage. She took a deep breath before entering Sophie's room. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she would do everything she could to protect these children and help them heal. The days passed, and CLA had to make tough decisions. She found out that Sophie and the twins would need to stay with foster parents for a while, but CLA would still be able to visit. CLA felt sad and scared, but she also felt relieved that it wasn't the worst case. Sophie had said she wanted to stay with CLA, and that made her feel stronger. There were lots of visits from social workers, and CLA had to follow many rules. But in the middle of everything, there were small moments of happiness. Emily smiled for the first time. Ethan calmed down when he heard Sophie's voice. And there was laughter when the family played games together. One night, after putting the twins to bed, Sophie asked CLA a question. Do you think Mom will be happy with this? With us? CLA felt her heart full of love, but also a little sad. Oh dear, she said softly. I'm sure your mom is looking down on us, smiling. She always wanted the best for you. And now you have even more people to love and care for you. Sophie smiled, her eyes full of tears. I like that, she whispered. Having a big family. As the day of the final court hearing got closer, CLA felt the worry grow stronger. She knew things were not certain. This arrangement could change at any time. CLA was called to a meeting at the hospital where she worked. She sat in front of a panel of hospital leaders, feeling strangely calm. Nurse CLA, said the hospital director in a serious voice, you know that your involvement in this case has crossed some important rules. Do you understand? CLA nodded, but kept her head up. I know I did things differently, she said, but I knew they were the right things to do. Sophie needed love, and so did the twins. For almost 2 hours, CLA explained everything she did, why she did it, and how she helped Sophie and the twins. She talked about their hard start, how Sophie was hurt, and how they all needed stability and love. If I could go back, she said, looking at everyone in the room, I would do it all over again. Being a nurse is not just about following rules. It's about caring for people. After a long silence, the director spoke again. Your care is admirable, Nurse CLA, but it also caused some problems. We need time to think about what happens next at this hospital. Meanwhile, Thomas, who had been struggling with addiction, was going through a tough rehab program. But the thought of his children kept him going. After a month of treatment, he asked to see his children. CLA was shocked when she heard the news. Part of her wanted to keep Sophie and the twins safe and away from Thomas, but she also knew family was important. She decided to tell Sophie. Sophie, CLA said one evening, after they tucked the twins into bed. Your dad has asked to see you. Sophie froze, her face full of fear and hope. He wants to see us? CLA nodded. The decision is yours, sweetheart. If you're not ready, we don't have to do it. Sophie hesitated for a moment, then spoke quietly. I want to, but you'll be there with me, right? CLA's heart hurt at how much Sophie trusted her. Of course, she said. I'll be there with you. The first visit with Thomas was tense. He looked different, thinner and more sober than before. Sophie held CLA's hand tightly. When Thomas came in, he looked nervous but smiled softly. Hi, princess, he said, tears in his eyes. Hi, little ones. Sophie didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, unsure. Then very quietly she said, Hi, Dad. The next hour was full of awkward silence and careful talking. Thomas tried to tell jokes, make conversation, and connect with Sophie and the twins. Sophie was cautious, sometimes talking and other times pulling back. When the visit ended, Sophie surprised everyone by giving her dad a quick hug. "Will you come back?" she asked softly, a mix of hope and fear in her voice. Thomas looked at CLA and then at Sophie. "I'm trying to be better," he said. "If you want me to come back, I will." In the days that followed, Sophie kept saying she wanted to stay with CLA. "You're my family now," she would say, her eyes filled with certainty. CLA felt her heart ache every time she heard that. "You'll always have a place in my heart," she would reply, "but your dad is trying. Shouldn't we give him a chance?" It was a constant struggle for CLA, torn between protecting Sophie and considering the possibility of the family being together again. Thomas was working hard on his recovery, and CLA heard good things from his therapists. But she saw the fear in Sophie's eyes, the hesitation that still lingered. The visits went on. Some were good, with laughter and bonding, while others were full of silence. Slowly, a bond was forming, but CLA knew it was fragile. One evening, CLA looked at the photos around her house. Sophie's smile, the twins growing up, and even a recent picture of Thomas holding the babies. She felt both happy and anxious. These new connections were special, but she knew they were delicate. The future was full of possibilities, some good and some scary. But for now, CLA allowed herself to feel hopeful. She believed that the love they were building would be strong enough to handle anything that came their way. CLA also knew there were some missing pieces in Sophie's past. She decided to dig deeper into the family's history, with Thomas's permission and Anne's help. She started by looking through public records and old newspaper articles. She found an article about Sophie's mother, Sarah Thompson, who had been a promising nursing student. CLA felt a chill when she saw Sarah's name. She was a nurse, just like CLA. The more CLA looked, the more pieces started to fit together. She found out that Sarah had worked at a children's hospital before she married Thomas. But there was still more to discover. One rainy afternoon, CLA met with Thomas at a quiet cafe. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "I need to know more about Sarah, about your life together." Thomas seemed healthier now, but still carried a heavy weight. He began to share his story. "Sarah was pure light," Thomas said. "We met when she was doing her nursing internship. I was recovering from a car accident. We fell in love quickly and married soon after. The first years were happy, but then my drinking became a problem. Sarah tried to fix things, but it was too hard." As he talked, CLA listened carefully, feeling a mix of sympathy and frustration. "When Sophie was born, everything changed," Thomas said. "She was like a little ray of sunshine. For a while, I thought everything would be okay. But then I went back to drinking." Sarah was devastated. She said she would leave, but she always stayed. When CLA heard Thomas talk about the last pregnancy, she felt even more sadness. "I didn't want more kids," he said, pain in his voice. "But Sarah was so happy. She thought it would help us start over. But I was a coward. Instead of facing my fears, I ran to the bottle." Meanwhile, Sophie was at home, going through old boxes of things Thomas had brought from their old apartment. She found a diary that belonged to her mom. When Sophie opened it, she saw her mother's handwriting. The first part was happy, but then it changed. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice," Sarah wrote. "I love Thomas, but the alcohol is destroying our family. Sophie deserves more. Maybe I should have stayed with my adoptive mother." Sophie froze. "Adoptive mother?" she whispered. She didn't know that her mom had been adopted. CLA's mind raced. This could explain why Sophie never knew her mom's biological family. Later, CLA made a shocking discovery. She found official documents that showed Sarah had been adopted. The realization hit her hard. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This changes everything." And her friend and social worker agreed. "On one hand, this could help you in the custody case, showing that you're family. But on the other hand, it could look like you were doing this for your own reasons." CLA knew it was a huge decision. When she got home, Sophie asked about her mom's adoptive mother. CLA's heart pounded. How could she tell Sophie that they were family by blood? It was too complicated. CLA felt hot tears on her face. All her old pain and regret came rushing back. She looked at Sophie and saw not just Sarah, but herself and her granddaughter. Sophie slowly stood up, her voice shaking. "So, you're my real grandmother?" she asked. CLA nodded. unable to speak because of the lump in her throat. Judge Harmon, seeing the emotional moment, called for quiet again. I think we need to take a break to process all of this. We'll come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. As the people in the room started to leave, CLA stayed in her seat. Her past and present had collided in a way she never expected. Her daughter, whom she had given up for adoption, was not only part of her life through Sophie, but also through the whole family she never knew. Thomas came up to her, Sophie by his side. I think we have a lot to talk about, he said softly. CLA looked at them, her newly discovered family. Yes, she said, her voice full of emotion. We certainly do. The next morning, CLA sat on her porch, holding a cold cup of tea. She couldn't stop thinking about what happened in court. The word grandmother felt strange, but also right. Sophie came to the door, still sleepy, but looking curious. Can I sit with you? She asked. CLA smiled and said, Of course, dear. They sat quietly, watching the sun rise. Sophie finally broke the silence. So, you really are my grandmother? She asked softly. CLA nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, Sophie. I gave your mother up for adoption when I was very young. Sophie looked at her with wonder. Mom used to say I reminded her of someone she couldn't remember. I think she was talking about you. At that moment, CLA's heart broke and healed at the same time. They spent hours talking, telling stories about Sarah, and learning more about each other. Meanwhile, Thomas was at home, staring at a photo of Sarah. He asked it, Did you know? Did you know, and never tell me? He was scared that CLA, now the biological grandmother, might take away his rights as a parent. Just then his phone rang. It was Ann, the social worker. Thomas, she said gently, I know this is a lot, but we need to talk about what happens next. And was also working hard, going through adoption records to understand the whole story. Back at CLA's house, Sophie played with the twins in the yard, watched carefully by CLA. CLA couldn't take her eyes off them, seeing not just the children she loved, but a part of herself she thought was lost. They have your eyes, Thomas said, standing behind her. CLA turned, surprised. I didn't expect to find you here, she said. Neither did I, he admitted. But after thinking about it, I realized this might be good for all of us. CLA looked at him, confused. You're not afraid of losing your rights? She asked. Thomas sighed. I'm terrified, he admitted. But I see how Sophie looks at you, and I see how much love you have for them. Maybe this is what they need, a bigger family, more love. CLA felt touched. Thank you, she said softly. Over the next days, CLA and Sophie spent lots of time together, sharing memories, cooking, and building their relationship. Thomas became a strong supporter of this new family. He brought the twins over to visit and shared more stories about Sarah with CLA. One afternoon, as CLA rocked Ethan to sleep, Sophie came to her, looking thoughtful. Grandma, she began, testing the new word. Do you think Mom would be happy with this? With us? CLA's heart filled with love and sadness. I'm sure your mom is looking down, smiling. She always wanted the best for you. And now, you have more people to love you. Sophie smiled through her tears. I like that, she whispered. Having a big family. The day of the final decision arrived. The courtroom was packed with people, all waiting for the judge to speak. After careful thought, Judge Harmon began. I'm ready to announce my decision. CLA held her breath, with Sophie's hand tightly in hers. Thomas will have primary custody of Sophie, Emily, and Ethan, the judge said. But he must continue treatment and stay sober. CLA, you are officially the biological grandmother of Sophie and the great-grandmother of the twins. You will have visitation rights and be a big part of their lives. Sophie stood up, her voice trembling but strong. I just want to say thank you for giving me the chance to have both my grandmother and my dad in my life. It's more than I ever dreamed of. Everyone in the room was moved. Judge Harmon banged his gavel and said, So it shall be. May this family find the healing and happiness they deserve. The next days brought many changes. CLA decided to retire from the hospital to focus on her new family. Thomas, with the support of CLA and Sophie, moved into a bigger house. He continued his treatment, determined to be the father his children deserved. As time passed, the family celebrated many firsts, like CLA's first Mother's Day as a grandmother. the twins' first birthday, and Sophie calling CLA grandma without hesitation. Then Christmas Eve came. CLA's house was decorated with a big Christmas tree and the smell of turkey and cookies. Thomas, carrying Emily, and Sophie, holding Ethan's hand, arrived. "Merry Christmas," they all said. CLA hugged them all and welcomed them inside. Sophie excitedly asked if they could open presents. "One each before dinner," CLA agreed. As they opened presents, CLA thought about the amazing year they had. The tragedy that had brought them together had become a beautiful blessing. Thomas came over and handed CLA a glass of wine. "A penny for your thoughts," he said softly. CLA smiled, just thinking about how life can surprise us. "A year ago, I was alone in a hospital, not knowing my life was about to change." Thomas nodded. "I know. I was at my lowest point, thinking I'd lost everything. And now, I have more than I ever dreamed of." Sophie looked at them and then hugged them both. "Thank you for being the best family I could ask for." CLA had tears in her eyes. "They say Christmas is for miracles," she said. "Looking at all of you, I think we've seen one." Everyone raised their glasses. "To family," they all said. As they celebrated together, CLA felt truly at home for the first time in years. The tragedy that had brought them together had turned into something beautiful. CLA knew this was just the beginning of a new and wonderful journey. Christmas wasn't about presents or decorations, but about forgiveness, love, and family. The family they had built together, stronger than ever. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring, and heartwarming stories, and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.